welcome. My name is Lucy Gray, and this is the final keynote of the U.S. Daytime hours. It is 9 o'clock here in Chicago, and where I am, but it's, I think, daytime the next day for our presenters. And so I'm really excited to have this group that is representing the Asia Pacific region of the world, and they're going to give us an update about what's going on with global citizenship education and other related topics today. We have three very distinguished guests with us. We have Dr. Karena Menzie-Ballantyne, Senior Lecturer at CQUniversity in Australia. We have Libby Giles, Director of Education at the Centers for Asia Pacific Excellence, and Farial Khan, Education Program Specialist from UNESCO in Bangkok. And I think we're in for a really special treat. If you're here, please make sure that you introduce yourself in the chat and say hello so that we know that you're here. And I'm going to turn it over to these ladies to take it away. And thank you for coming, everyone. We're so grateful to have you here.
Thanks so much, Lucy. And it's our absolute pleasure to join this conference. And we would really like to express our appreciation to Lucy and the team behind her that pulled this conference together, because it's a marathon task. As we do in Australia, I'd like to begin by an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional lands on which we are today and on which all of you who might be listening now or in the recording, we pay our respects to the elders and the ancestors, because they are the holders of the wisdom, the knowledge, and they have passed that through generations, for which we are extremely grateful. Today, hopefully, we're going to share a little bit of wisdom with you by giving you some insights into what's happening in the Asia Pacific region. And what we want to do today is we want to show you how the international policies that have been shaping this conversation for the past decade and very recently is influencing the Asia Pacific region, but then give you some examples of how they are actually being contextualized in the individual countries. So let's just start, and we'll go into these in more depth as our panel gets together. But firstly, I just want to talk about where I'm based. And for me, it's the land of the Tarablang, Gurang, Garangarang and Balai peoples in Bundaberg in Queensland, Australia. So some of the policies that have been influencing us and others in our region over the last decade or so is the UNESCO Pillars of Learning, Ban Ki-moon's Global Education First initiative, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly, of course, in education. We're looking at SDG 4 and Target 4.7. We have, of course, the 2016 Paris Agreement on climate change. In 2018, the OECD introduced their PISA Global Competence Framework and subsequently a Global Competence Assessment. In not so much from Australian perspective, but certainly a big influencer in Europe, and Libby will explain a little more about this down the track, is the Dublin Declaration, which was signed, as the name implies, in Ireland in November of 2022. And that's proving to be a huge driver in global education in Europe. And then, of course, we have the most recent sign-off, literally agreed to, about 3-4 days ago on the 10th of November, is the 1974 recommendation on peace, international understanding, human rights and fundamental freedoms, and its revision has just been signed off. And again, I will hand over to one of my colleagues, Farial from UNESCO, to talk a little bit more about that. But these are the types of policies that have been influencing the discussions here in the Asia Pacific region, as they have from around the world. And I like to put this slide up, which I call a rose by any other name, because I think it helps us to see that we might be on the same page, even though we're using different terminologies. So depending which of those policies that I have just outlined is a driver in your context, you might know the terminology global education, you might know citizenship education, global citizenship education, education for sustainable development or sustainability, education for global competence. You might be talking about 21st century skills. If you come from countries like Indonesia, you might be talking about the 4 Cs, because that is the way that they are implementing global competence through their curriculum. If you're a follower of the new pedagogies for deep learning, Michael Fullan and colleagues' work, you might know in terms of the 6 Cs, and one of those in particular being citizenship. A newer term that we've started hearing in this context is human competence. But then you might also be hearing about internationalization of the curriculum or other terminologies. Now, the reason I put all of those up there is to bring together some understanding that here in the Pacific, here in Asia, over in Europe, different countries are using different terms. They have different drivers. But the important message is that you have a consistent language, a consistent terminology, a consistent understanding of what you are trying to achieve in your context, in your country. And so that's how we've really shaped our thoughts around the presentation here today is, yes, these are all these big aspirational, visional policies that come often from the Northern Hemisphere, some to the global north, as we may refer to some of these countries. But what does it look like in our context? So I want to start that conversation by giving you a little bit of an insight into a case study of what I've been working on here in Queensland. So we've worked with the Queensland Department of Education for 3 years now, and very exciting because the project has literally come to fruition in the last few weeks. But where did we start? What did we do? What have we learnt from that we can share with you in case you're going through a similar process or would like to undertake a similar process in your context? So we started with an international framework, and the framework that the department decided to use was the OECD PISA International Framework. Now, I know that you can't read all the wording there, but if you're not familiar, if you just Google PISA Global Competence Framework, you can see the whole framework and the 4 dimensions that it contains in terms of looking at global issues, things like intercultural understanding, taking action, sustainability. So hear those words and think about some of that terminology I was looking at before. These are not multiple agendas. They do have different nuances. And in academia land where I live, it's important that we think about those nuances and we think about those differences. But I'm also a pragmatist, and I know that for the people in schools and in the classroom, as long as there is a shared language, those nuances become, as they should, a bit blurred, because there are so many overlaps, for example, between education for sustainable development and education for global citizenship. So we don't want our educators feeling overwhelmed like they've got so many agendas to try and address, because if you dig deeply, there are so many common factors between them. So we just chose that framework as a starting point. But we wanted to know, and our schools wanted to know, yes, but what does that actually look like in a school? What does that actually look like in a classroom? How do we take it from aspirational document to practical outcomes? And we decided to do this from a very ground up perspective, because as you know, so often departments come up with these wonderful new initiatives that somebody in the department has thought up, And next thing you know, the school principals, the heads of curriculum, the classroom teachers are having to implement something that perhaps they don't understand, they don't agree with, or they don't have the professional development, the professional learning to implement, even if they do want to do it. And one of the things we found here in the Australian context, a lot of our global competence sits with what we call the general capabilities. And we've heard time and time again from our teachers that they know they're important, but they're not quite sure how to do it. So, very quick rundown on what we did. It's spaced over 3 years. And in the first year, we got 11 schools who were already on this journey. Some of them were using the OECD Global Compass, some were using new pedagogies, some were using SDGs as framings for what they were doing, but they were already on their global education journey. So we got that group of schools together. First up, a school principal, a head of curriculum, and a passionate teacher from each school. And we said to them, okay, let's take the 4 dimensions of the PISA Global Competence Framework, and you tell us what that might look like for a school at the beginning, developing, or up to the leading levels of this type of work. Then it came to the job between a couple of people and myself to take those 600 post-it notes and turn them into some semblance of order, which you can imagine took some time. Then what we did is we got another group of 11 schools, same principle, same cyclical thing of workshops, and we asked them to look at our draft and asked them to do some action research projects to see if that worked in their schools and give us feedback. And then at the end of that period of time, we got all 22 schools together with the final draft of the framework. We got their opinions again and made further changes. And then we sent it out further to other stakeholders, for example, the teachers' union, other sections of the department, to ask for their input. But we only did that after we got the schools' perspectives, because for us, that was the really, really important one. Now, on my next slide, I'll tell you about a mistake we made in that. I'll throw out there, if anybody is interested in the Queensland Global Competence Framework, it has been recently signed off by the Director General, so it is now a public document. So if you are interested, I'm very happy to share it with you or talk about it with you. So we know that Lucy always likes us to say, well, what can we learn from this and how can other people take action as well? So what we want to do is we want to convey with you what lessons did we learn that might be useful in your context as well. Okay, the first thing we learned is that reminder that collaboration takes time. And I know that my colleague at the department felt quite a lot of pressure sometimes from the top up to say, what's happening? Where is this thing? When are you going to produce it? And I give her due credit that she pushed back and she said, you either want a truly collaborative process or you want a quick outcome. We are very, very proud of the document that we have finished with, and we feel like it is a true representation of the messages that the schools have talked about. Things like creating brave spaces to allow those really important conversations. Things like co-design teaching and learning, ways to connect with your community over issues of sustainability, both local and global. So that takes time. So that's the first message. If you want to undertake this process, you're not going to have it done by Christmas time. You're not going to have it by the new year. You're going to have to think about the way in which you are doing that. The second thing, and this was the mistake that I have mentioned before, is when we did have that draft, although we had had some Indigenous educators involved in the process as participants, we didn't specifically reach out to our First Nations people early in the process. And we took that on board as an error of judgment, because when we did reach out to them at the same time as other stakeholders, they felt that perhaps the Indigenous perspective at that stage would be an add-on, and it wouldn't be a true reflection of those Indigenous perspectives. So We took that on board. We did go through a consultation process with them, so there is that voice in there, but we did take it on board that we should have done that very, very early in the process. So you're working in contexts where you need to be talking to those Indigenous peoples. Please learn from our mistakes and do that very early. The other thing I want to remind you is that the only constant is change, especially when you're talking about government departments, about schools. We had so many staff move on during the 3-year process. What was actually quite interesting is many of them moved on with promotions, partly as a result of them being involved in this process and learning from it. So it was actually quite a joy that they were moving on. But it did mean that we were dealing with different personnel who then we had to bring on board again. So do remember that you need to be flexible, and you also need to make sure that the concepts and the actions you're developing are not reliant on 1 or 2 people. Next, a really important one and kind of a scary one for departments and school principals sometimes is you need to allow a culture of experimentation and risk-taking at all levels. You cannot be truly contextualized, truly transformative if you don't allow an element of risk and maybe even some failures sometimes. So you need time, you need freedom to take risks, and you need a visionary leadership open to the sorts of changes that you're going to recommend. So that's just a very brief case study of how we took one international policy and we contextualised it to our state of Queensland. I'd like to pass over now to my colleague Libby Giles, and she's going to give you a big picture down to a New Zealand example. Thanks, Libby.
Kia ora, Karena, and kia ora e te whānau. No Aotearoa ahau, no ko Libby Giles toku ingoa, no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. My name's Libby Giles. I'm Director of Education for the Centres of Asia Pacific Excellence in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And my mihi goes to the organisers of this conference, especially to Lucy, who's been so amazingly helpful to all of us, and to all of you who are tuning in here. And we are going to be very, very keen to stay in touch with you, because this really is a collective effort and the aggregation of knowledge that is just invaluable. So what I'm going to go through, Karena's already sort of mentioned the large kind of the key drivers for this thing, and also sort of really sort of clarified that this thing can be called has a lot of names. So specifically, I'm going to just mention the Te Tiriti Waitangi. This is the treaty, the document that New Zealand is founded on. It's a bicultural nation, and so everything that we do must align with the principles of the treaty. Te Mātaiaho is the refreshed curriculum, New Zealand curriculum, which is in the process of being rolled out at the moment. And it, like global citizenship itself, is high level and non-prescriptive. So there are certain principles that stay true. The models might change, and there can be, schools can interpret and deliver in any number of ways that they wish. But there are certain principles that must be kind of abided by. The International Education Strategy. So New Zealand's International Education Strategy has 3 main goals, and one of them is global citizenship education. And the OECD peer review recommendation that has just gone to New Zealand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this kind of pulls in other players apart from education at the government level. So, sometimes I think we need to kind of look at the concept of global citizenship sometimes before we actually look at what global citizenship education is. And, these terms are thrown around often and not always delved into. And if we look at defining global citizenship, then actually none of us are legally, because there's no world government to give us rights. But because if you look at the definition of citizenship, it has 2 parts. It has the part where states bestow rights on its citizens, but then you have an element to citizenship that is to do with behavioural characteristics. So it's responsibility that gives legitimacy, if not legality, to the notion of global citizenship. It is an internationally established framework for transformative education that does include education for sustainable development and all of those other initiatives, prepares students and non-students, this is lifelong learning, to engage in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. It is grounded in local, regional, and international agreements and policies. So from international to global, we are moving from an international to global world stage. So international, by virtue of its name, inter, is about relationships between countries. It's about the state self-interest. So it's about, us and them. Global is about the planetary interest, we. It's the acknowledgement that we have, that we all share something. And a really a lovely quote from President Francois Hollande on the conclusion of the Paris Agreement in 2015 was what brings us together is the planet itself. UNESCO's pillars of learning have long been pillars of perhaps most curricula around the world. Learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. Again, high-level concepts. More recently, in 2012, a fifth pillar was added, learning to transform oneself and society. So these collectively, and particularly that last one, are incredibly pertinent to what we're talking about here. The Dublin Declaration. Now, Karena did mention this briefly, and Lucy mentioned Jean. Jean is the Global Education Network of Europe. And in, I think it was quite a short process, over about 18 months, they drafted up a declaration on global education in Europe to 2050. So also known as the Dublin Declaration, because it was approved and acclaimed, not signed, by some 25 countries just a year ago in Dublin. So the declaration seeks to ensure that European education systems are inclusive, technologically advanced, sustainable, well-funded, preparing citizens for a prosperous future. It emphasizes digital literacy and the use of technology, encourages partnerships across Europe to share knowledge and facilitate student and teacher mobility, as well as better alignment between education and employment. Education for sustainable development and global citizenship are at the forefront, tackling global issues like climate change and social equality. So the drafting of the declaration was led by policymakers, but in partnership with cross-sector stakeholders, including youth and including a group of global critical friends, individuals with expertise and passion for global education from other parts of the world. I was very privileged to be a member of that group and can attest to the genuine and inclusive spirit of the process. Our work continues beyond the adoption of the declaration, and we're going to get to that a little bit more in our discussion time, but you'll just see a really, really timely, this nice image here on the screen is a very timely progress report that's just come out of the Genes Roundtable discussions in Europe. And so out of around 25, I think, original countries, already 11 countries are actually rolling out work. There's amazing peer-to-peer work going on between Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Education, work across sectors. So the actual work is happening. The rubber is hitting the road. This is this kind of stuff that we always find so challenging. It's one thing to have these great sort of policy statements and things, but actually to get some action. This is a really, really heartening example. And and mentioned there too is the Global Critical Friends process, which is flourishing. So the intention would have been that the Global Critical Friends, who were brought in to give regional voice and critique the process, would have ended on the 5th of November last year when the declaration was agreed to. But because the group gained so much strength and there was so much interest in this process that we started to talk about extending it to other regions. So I think we'll pick up on that shortly in our discussion. This is a little bit more about our refreshed curriculum, vision for young people. So for Akonga, which is students, it's about the understanding that the world is connected, having strong identities, languages, cultures, beliefs. So all of these concepts in this very much align with the CAPES, which is the Centre for Asia Pacific Excellence. I'm just going to flick back to a screen to show you our framework, which is really well aligned to this curriculum refresh, the understand, know, act, and change. But really the principles, the big ideas that underpin this framework on the right there are tuakiritanga, identity, hononga, connections, and kaitiakitanga, responsibility. So this is also the international education strategy that I referred to before. Global Citizens is very clearly there, and our organisation has been tasked with supporting that. So part of the rationale for placing global citizenship at such high importance in international education was the recognition that we need to stop the commodification of people and actually offer rich educational experiences for international and domestic students alike. Step Up to the World, to Maya Kite Ao, is a forum on global citizenship education that we hosted in September. And I was very, very happy to be joined there by Karena and Farial, and also our another global critical friend of ours, La Salette from Jean. This forum was really about raising the profile of global citizenship education, but also offering a wide range of support and drawing people together in a movement to transform education, not reform it, but transform it. And it was, we asked people to step up, and they really did. We had 400 plus registrations. About 100 of those were online, and quite a few from the Asia Pacific region. And the work, we had an enormous range of speakers and workshops and moderated discussions. So we focused on professional learning, cross-sector engagement. We had people from civil society, from sustainable business, from regular business, from government, from local municipalities, a strong youth component, and of course our partners, our overseas partners, which was just fantastic. So what it really, really demonstrated was a huge groundswell of interest in this kind of transformative education, and a demand, an absolute demand for change. So we were lucky to have some decision makers there, but I know that we are going to have to keep prodding them to actually, to get some change made. But we've got a lot of ongoing communication with our stakeholders, locally, regionally, and internationally. And we are really strengthening our work, particularly in the Asia Pacific, because we can see what we can do collectively. I mean, I think when we look at the SDGs, I think maybe my favourite one is Goal 17, partnerships. We can't do this alone. It's really got to be done together. And I think on that note, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Farial.
Thank you so much, Libby, and thank you so much, Karena. And good day to all participants. I'm Farial Khan. I'm from UNESCO Bangkok Regional Office for Asia Pacific, and I am really looking forward to our dialogue today. And I'd like to thank Lucy and all the organizers for having UNESCO on board. So, Karena and Libby have both been, framing the discussions within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. And within the SDGs, the SDG on education, which is the number 4, and SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, as well as, of course, the one number 17 on partnerships, are some of the key SDGs that recognize the importance of global education in empowering learners to live together peacefully with each other and also in harmony with nature. So but the one that is really at the heart of our work, as Karena mentioned, is within target SDG 4, within SDG 4, target 4.7, which looks at global education and appreciation of cultural diversity. And this is really part and parcel of 4.7, and it's a concept that is embedded in the broader concept of transforming education. And this is really important. Like Libby just said, we're not looking at reforming education, we're looking at transforming education systems. So targets 4.7 is really a lever for enabling systemic transformations in education by ensuring that the curriculum, pedagogy, assessments, and learning environments are meaningful for the social, political, economic, cultural, and environmental contexts. And global citizenship education and global education for international understanding is central to achieving SDG 4.7. And the discourse is moving through an integrated approach to achieve 4.7, to transform education through an interdisciplinary approach to teaching and learning that is geared towards motivating and empowering learners to make informed decisions and actions to address ever-changing challenges and at the individual, community, and global levels. So target 4.7, with focus on global citizenship education and education for sustainable development, is a means to achieving all the 17 SDGs and a key enabler for empowering learners to proactively explore local and global solutions to the uncertain world we are living in. So this is really at the heart of our work at UNESCO. And next, please. So I think it's a, I would like to just provide a very quick history of how the concepts of global citizenship education and ESD have evolved over the decades. And these are not new concepts. I mean, they begin with, like, right at the beginning, UNESCO's efforts in global citizenship education are grounded in its own constitution of 1945, which aims to build peace in the minds of men and women. And also the concepts draw on the principles and targets from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is 1948. So these are not new concepts for us. The recommendation of 1974, which has just been revised and endorsed, and I'm going to come to this in a minute, for international understanding, cooperation, peace, and education, it's as early as 1974. So more recently, we have the Global Action Program. The UNESCO's General Conference in 2019 adopted a new framework for education for sustainable development. The Sustainable Development Goals, of course, are 2015 are pivotal. So I just wanted to give you a sense that while global citizenship education and ESD have been developing through parallel processes over the decades, more recently the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015, and then in 2022, the APROMEC 2, the Asia Pacific Regional Education Ministers Conference, which took place in Bangkok, and the Transforming Education Summit, which took place in New York, hosted by the Secretary General of the United Nations. they have articulated the interdependencies and complementarities between these two very important levers for societal transformations. So we are not really looking just for transformations within education systems. We are looking at societal transformations. And the revision of the 1974 recommendation and its endorsement on Thursday, the 9th of November, it's been pivotal in bringing together these matters to the center of our work in educational transformations. So if we look at the next slide. So this is really a historic moment again for our work in global education, and this glow is very timely. It's taking place at the same time as UNESCO's 42nd session of the General Conference, where ministers of education, heads of states, educators, education stakeholders are currently meeting in Paris. To discuss our work, including in education, science, culture, and communications. And at the high-level ministerial dialogue on education for peace, on the 9th of November, as part of UNESCO's 42nd session of the General Conference, the ministers of education collectively voiced their commitment to UNESCO's revised 1974 recommendation, which has now been named the Recommendation on Education for Peace and Human Rights, International Understanding, Cooperation, Fundamental Freedoms, Global Citizenship Education, Global Citizen, and Sustainable Development. So these are words that have now been added. Global citizenship and sustainable development have been added to the actual name of the recommendation. And this is a real big achievement for all of us who work in global education. At the same meeting, the ministers of education also looked at delivered statements that reiterated the significance of educational policies in promoting education's pivotal role in promoting peace, respect, and combating hate speech in all forms. And this is really at the heart of our work in global education. So I wanted to put this on the table because this is discourse that is going on like in the last few days, as Libby and Karena just mentioned. So how are these international policies framing our work at country level? At UNESCO, we have a very strong partnership with APSU in South Korea. It's the Asia Pacific Center for Education and International Understanding. And they have an Asia Pacific teacher exchange for global education, which is a bilateral teacher exchange program between the Republic of Korea and 7 Asia Pacific countries, namely Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, Malaysia, Mongolia, Philippines, and Thailand. And by just a second. And so by teaching the respective subjects in a new curricular context and cultural context, teachers become learners themselves in understanding how to deal with students of different backgrounds, and students receive education beyond the textbook through their daily interactions with teachers. And this has really been a quite pivotal in enabling global education concepts as part of our work in Asia Pacific region. Next, if we look very quickly, and then I will wrap up. We have a very interesting program as part of our innovative practices Together for Peace and UNESCO Bangkok initiative towards sustaining positive peace in Asia Pacific communities. And this is positive peace. We are saying it is not just the absence of conflict. It also means justice, equity, and equality. And that lasting peace addresses social and economic disparities and conflicts, and addresses aspects of conflicts and violence associated with exploitation and inequality. So Together for Peace, it's a multifaceted approach to educational, pedagogical, and community-based programs through a series of priority actions already being applied as part of UNESCO's 2030 mandate in education, science, culture, communications, and the social and human sciences. So these are enabling young learners to understand how they can live together peacefully in harmony with each other. Next, please, the final slide, I believe. Here is another example, and I really want to underline and underscore the linkages between global education and also the work we are doing on education for sustainable development with COP28 coming up, and climate change really high on our mandate. So UNESCO launched the global campaign Trash Hack in 2021. And at the heart of the Trash Hack campaign is education for sustainable development. And the campaign draws on the power of schools working together to take action and offer a guide to help teachers to present students with fresh facts and statistics on waste and easy and cheap trash hacking activities, which are adaptable for all ages and at the regional level. So this is like, plastic pollution, marine pollution, looking at different how we can recycle. So these are really concrete activities which young learners can adapt as part of their day-to-day learning. And this really focuses on behavioral changes, attitudinal changes, to enable sustainable development. So I think this is my last slide. And some of the lessons that we have learned is partnerships is really at the core of our work. And we really, which is why we are so happy to have this opportunity to collaborate with GLOW and the Global Citizenship Education Network, which is very active in the in the Asia Pacific region. We are working with universities, researchers, to have evidence-based, policies that shape our strategies and also shape our practice. And I think we need more evidence coming from the school level on what is the impact of the work we are doing. Sometimes we are continuing activities and we are having we implement the activities, but I think it would also be, as we are already in 2023 and 2030 is not very far away, we really want to now look at impact. And I think this would be a big priority for us to look at, to evaluate the impact of some of the work that has been done to date, and to see then what are some of the, how do we need to step up, as Libby said, to really become, address the gaps. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop here and
thank you so much, Fariel. And congratulations doing battle with your internet there. You went on bravely and we got everything that you needed to say. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Yes, and to pull in just a couple of points that Libby and Fariel have been making. Firstly, there are some wonderful resources out there. Fariel has mentioned APSEU organization in Korea that works closely with Fariel's UNESCO Global Citizenship Education Network. And they have numerous resources such as handbooks for teachers, handbooks, I think the new one's for parents and community, isn't it, Fariel? That are freely available to any educator anywhere in the world. There is a range of languages available, but there are a number of those that are in English for those who are English speakers. And as I say, these things are freely available and they're wonderful resources. So one of the messages, I suppose, is the way that the Asia Pacific region is collaborating with each other in terms of sharing resources. The other one I wanted to just pick up on there, Libby, is the point that you made in terms of where we're going next. And I just wondered if you could speak briefly to that, and Ferial, feel free to jump in. Picking up not so much a declaration, but maybe a prioritisation of global education and where we're heading with that.
Thanks, Karena. So in the process of the Dublin Declaration, which was mostly done online, but it was such a great process. It really was genuinely inclusive, and things that the Global Critical Friends said actually turned up in the declaration and the drafting and so on. And at one point, I did sort of say, Mr. Lim, actually, who's the director of UpSU, was on this group as well. And so at one point I said, would it be, worth us exploring this idea for the Asia Pacific? And that idea was really, really well received. And not just for the Asia Pacific, but some of the other global friends from Latin America and parts of Africa as well were also quite keen. And so what should have, our mandate should have finished in November, but it didn't, because actually we realised that we as a team of people had a really strong connection and shared vision and determination. And in fact, that group has grown. So now, Karena and Farial are part of the group as well. And so we extend. Obviously, there you can't just sort of get a European declaration and pop it in another region. That is absolutely not the intention. But what there are lessons to be learned, and there is sort of help there for a really great group of people who have gone through a really great process with some fantastic outcomes. So there are lots of great lessons to be learned that can sort of really help us in other regions. But obviously we have to work very, very closely with our own in our own regions, and what a big and complex region we live in. So that's no mean task trying to, you can't just come up with a declaration and expect everyone to agree with it. For a start, who's in the region, for one thing, but what does it include? So it's complex. But taking a wee bit of a step back from that, that is something that might happen. But in the meantime, there's an awful lot that we can be doing and are doing together as a region. So, the work that we're currently doing at the moment between us is testament to that, and developing things. So there have been two conferences very recently. UpSU had its annual Pedagogy and Practice conference, which basically is UNESCO's Pedagogy and Practice conference on GCED in Seoul. And so a meeting was called there that included the three of us to look at having a meeting in the first half of next year on the implementation of the revised UNESCO recommendations in the Asia Pacific. So this seems like something quite sort of meaty that we can get on with. We can actually, get working together. Whether that results in some kind of declaration or not, who knows? But it's a deliverable, and it's something that we can really work on together. So I really liked that idea.
Fabulous. Thank you for that. And it's very exciting, the momentum that this has built in recent times. And so maybe by the GLOW conference next year, we might be able to give you a bit of an update on the way that the Asia Pacific region is working together in this regard. Now, Lucy, can I just ask, or anybody else who is out there, if there is any questions that you'd like to post in the chat or put to our panel members? If not, we have some other things we can share.
While we are waiting for a question, I would just like to highlight what Karena and Libby have just said, that, the 1974 revised recommendation has just been endorsed. It's fresh and I think this is the first time I'm speaking about the 1974 recommendation since its endorsement. So this GLOW is a really timely dialogue for us, because we can now see how, and this needs to be led by the member states, how we are going to adapt this at the country level. So I think the leadership coming from institutions and partners in our, in New Zealand, in Australia, in our member states, South Korea, APSIO. This is going to be pivotal in how this recommendation is implemented. And we hope to maybe gather sometime in the first half of next year to maybe have a regional dialogue on what would be the way forward to raise awareness on how we can implement this recommendation in Asia Pacific, but with the participation of all the stakeholders from the different member states. So we welcome partnership with all of you, because this would be a shared collaborative effort to make this a reality on the ground. No one can do this alone.
That's the really important point, Farial, and I really appreciate you making that as we draw to the end of our timing here, because our brief today was to give you a bit of an insight into what is happening in the Asia Pacific region, but we talk global for a reason. And so we see all of these things as global partnerships. We're just giving you some of the ways that we're working together in this region. But of course, we have partnerships all over the world. And we are always really happy to talk to people who would like to work together on these sorts of projects. And in the spirit of what Farial was mentioning, of course, the revision of the 1974 recommendations is a global decision. All of the UN member states, to my knowledge, have been instrumental in feeding back into that document and endorsing that document. So that is, as Farial and Libby are pointing out, a really good turning point for us to reignite enthusiasm and initiatives in the global education sphere. Now, I'm a bit conscious of time now, Lucy, so I'm thinking perhaps we should wrap up at this point.
Do you need me to wrap up, or would you like to wrap up?
Well, we're very happy for you to just give any closing comment, given that you've sat and had a listen to our presentation. We've had the pleasure of working with each other for a long time, so it would be nice to perhaps wrap up with your perspective.
Yeah, this is foundational to what every person who works in this field should know, if they don't know already. And, I feel that I'm extremely tired here, so hopefully I can get my words out with some articulation. But, if we don't recognize that the importance of having global relationships after the pandemic, then I don't know what is going to wake up people. And I think anybody who's worked in this field for a long time, and I'm fairly new to it, it's been going on for years. We've been having these conversations here in the US, trying to get traction. And there are a lot of small organizations who are doing great things, but there's no, at least where we are, there's no collective movement, it seems. And so I think to make progress, you have to know where you've come from, and you have to know who else is in the space. And this presentation really kind of gives a really thorough outline of what those policies are. And I also think it's important too for classroom teachers like Martha in the chat to know what's going on policy wise, because eventually that will impact the classroom. I think practitioners need to learn from the people doing the research, and the researchers need to learn from the people on the ground too. So for me, this is I'm genuinely honored and happy that you all shared this with us today. And I hope that many people will watch the recording, because it's very, very important.
Thank you so much for that, Lucy. And thank you to you for giving us this opportunity and this platform to not only to share what's happening in the Asia Pacific region, but to share with so many global educators that I've already started watching some of the recordings. This is an amazing forum, and we really appreciate the opportunity. I perhaps just finish by saying there's our email addresses on that final slide. We are in the spirit of global citizenship, we love to share, we love to talk to people, we love to work with people. So please, if you are feeling alone, if you feel like you want to form a partnership or talk to us, there's our email addresses. Please feel free to do so. And thank you so much, those of you who could join us here today, or those of you who are listening to our recording.
I'm just about to go to bed. Hey, can I just say one more thing? Because I think there's something that really captured, really sort of captured my heart, actually, I think, was Karena and I were both at the Angel Conference in Paris in June. And there was so much talk about, transforming education, not reforming it. And this is, how important it is. And to say that, the most educated people in countries in the world are causing the most damage. So education is the problem as well. So actually, maybe it's time that we did things differently and stop just trying to pop initiatives in to existing systems. We're already overwhelming teachers with things to do. So this isn't one of those things. This is about thinking and doing differently.
Absolutely. Excellent. And on that transforming front, Farial, is there any last comment from you?
I'm just listening to Libby and thinking of artificial intelligence and what are going to be the implications of generative AI when you talk about transforming education systems. This is another issue when it comes to global education, when it comes to issues of ethical and responsible use of generative AI to inform our work in global education and citizenship education and education for sustainable development. They are going to be, the landscape is going to change very rapidly, and we better be ready for that.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Another reason that we need to be totally transformative and not just imposing another thing. Thank you again, Lucy, for this opportunity. And as I say, if anybody wants to reach out after, we're very happy to hear from them.
Thank you, everyone.